welcome back to the Institute for Black Male Studies. Today I do have the honor of getting a chance to interview somebody whose work I've been watching for several years online. A brilliant scholar doing some interesting work. Want to get a chance to interview him and find out more about how he got to where he got to. So let me go ahead and welcome, if I may, one Irami Frimpong. If you want to go ahead and briefly self-introduce, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yes, my name is Irami Osei-Frimpong. I'm a PhD student at the University of Georgia, and I got studying Black men, not because I'm a Black man necessarily, but because I was studying freedom and our institutions of freedom and what kind of institutions are required for any of us to be free, both for our families, our jobs, and in our, polity. And when you study freedom, you get to study institutions of unfreedom and like what are the obstacles for us being free and actually determining our lives, our everyday lives. And I started seeing that so many of the institutions of unfreedom were targeting Black men. And not necessarily because they were Black, but also because they were Black, but also because they were Black men. And so they were targeting Black men in a way that was different from the way they were targeting Black women. Not that they weren't targeting Black women, they were definitely targeting Black women, but not in the same way. And so there was the gender differentiation in the structures of oppression and how that was worked. And then I started to look at the perpetrators of this violence, and it wasn't always white men, because you start looking at gender and in the academy, and everyone just kind of points you towards white men as if they're the locus of all the problems. But I'm pretty sure that America can't be America with respect to its racial justice and labor policies if it wasn't the America that white women in America also kind of co-sign. And so a lot of our problems in terms of race and labor, like, we need to understand gender. We need to understand the gender of the perpetrators. We need to understand gender of the victims. We need to understand how this all works together. We need to understand patriarchy as a family game, not just, a male thing. It's a family game. And, the family is ruling over everyone who's not in the family. And Black people, we are not in the family. And that's kind of our characteristic feature. So that's how I kind of got started. Studying Black men as the victims of patriarchy,
right,
and what that means.
Now, I'm just out of curiosity, since we're talking about the family, tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you end up getting started in all of this, in terms of starting your education. So where are you from?
So I'm from California.
Really?
I'm from California. Yeah, I'm from Southern California. And then I did my undergrad at Berkeley. And I went to, in high school, my high school was pretty much all white, smattering of Asians, and in Orange County. And then I went to Berkeley, which was, mostly Asian, and white people were the minority, and they were an embattled minority. They had to run to the Greek system because they were just not, it wasn't their home, and they felt some sort of way about it. And I realized that the Bay Area is awesome for that. It's not awesome because it's a little bit priced out of where Black people are right now, but for the fact that, white people have to watch themselves, I kind of appreciated that at Berkeley. And so then I moved to Chicago for a while, and all this time I kind of studied freedom and philosophy. And, I got into studying philosophy because I just kind of studied what the coolest guy on my dorm room floor studied. And he studied philosophy, and I thought he was pretty cool. So I just started studying philosophy. There's no great, I've always wanted to do this. Like, no, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got to school. So I started studying philosophy. And then all of the really kind of interesting questions, the only people who actually saw them as questions, I found were philosophers and who didn't presuppose kind of dubious answers.
Okay.
Like think about all the stuff we say about gender. You can't really study in a gender studies program. You can't, no, because they'll just assume that like you must hate women because you're not a feminist. And I'm like, well, I was a feminist until I started reading more feminists. So I actually, when I started reading feminists, I was like, these people assume outgroup men have power that outgroup men don't have. And then you read other like genocidal studies and you feel like outgroup men are the first people targeted. Like you read like stories about Rwanda, stories about the Holocaust, and like the outgroup men are the first ones to go. So as bad as women get it, like outgroup men seem to die pretty quickly. And then you look at like a lot of these in-group women seem to be doing pretty well. So it was hard for me to find an oppressed group that like lives longer than I do, lives more comfortably than I do, like has higher mortality, like morbidity rates, lower homelessness, and then makes more money on the job than I do. And unlike black people, like white women are the biggest voting demographic in the nation. They're voting plurality. So we pretty much have the politics we have because it's the politics white women are willing to talk about and fight for on both sides of the aisle. Now, and we don't really talk about it like that, but there's a reason why the Democratic Party is not talking about jobs or reparations. What they're talking about is abortion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's your Democratic. That's the Democratic Party black people go 90% to. Has no business talking, like is not concerned with us. And like I'm pro-choice. I'm also pro-reparation. So I just feel like if white women want me to talk about abortion, I'm going to need them to talk about reparations. And that's in my line of work and in my view, that's kind of a fair ask.
Well, I hear a little social dominance theory in there. When did some of these ideas begin to gel for you, especially the questions around the difference between what we're hearing in the classroom or in media versus the reality of, as you were pointing out, black men's lives and the empirical data around that? When did that gel for you? Was it early on in undergrad or did it come around later? How did that work?
I mean, I've always kind of wondered, how do we get from here to there? And there is a place where black people are free, where black people have as much of both social and political power as their white counterparts, where black people can live and die without having to kiss any white butt because it's white. Because I tell people, black people, especially black men of a certain size with a little bit of bass in their voice, they have two jobs. One of it to do the job that they're hired to do. The second job is to make white people feel comfortable. And I just don't think that black people should have two jobs. I want black people to have one job. And I don't think making white people feel comfortable about the legacy degradation of blackness in America should be a job that falls asymmetrically on black people. So I've always thought, how do we get from here to that space where black people are self-determining, truly self-determining, not self-determining until I get a little bit mouthy, and then all of a sudden my video gets dropped, or I get called an anti-Semite like Mark Lamont Hill, or like, I want black people to be able to talk and not have to worry, not all sound like Obama, who pretty much just made white liberals comfortable, but actually talk the truth about black life without having to worry about censorship for making white people uncomfortable about the truth about white people. So, So I was trying to figure out how do we get from here to there, and then I started finding the obstacles. Where do we get from, like, who's shutting down these conversations and in what venue? And the people shutting down these conversations weren't always white dudes who are Republican. It was people who just wanted to unify. What you say is divisive. Well, we're divided. If you look at any like graph of racial assets and racialized wealth and opportunities, and like we are divided. So like, let's deal with the division and be honest about the division before we can come to healing. You don't just put a Band-Aid on a tumor and expect it to go away. Like we need to actually talk about it. And who was shutting down these conversations weren't always white guys. Like a lot of them was white women. A lot of it was black people who were paid to shut down this conversation. And if you don't know this, and I'm sure a lot of the people who listen to your show do know this, one of the most lucrative jobs in America for black people is handling other black people and managing the justice claims of black people. And that's not, and managing, I mean, like, as in like massaging and making them go away. Al Sharpton's job, like a lot of these guys' job is to handle and manage mouthy Negroes. And I want mouthy Negroes to be mouthy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Now I did philosophy in undergrad, and there's no
yeah.
guarantee that anybody going through philosophy is going to appreciate the relationship
No,
between philosophy and politics. Did
no.
you come out of a political family? What helped to kind of shape your this push into analyzing the political over other? I mean, because you could have gone anywhere with that. You could have
Yeah.
studied being. You could have studied whatever. What pushed you specifically into politics?
Well, it started with, you look at Socrates being killed in Athens for trying to like seek the truth and kind of work through this in dialogue. They resented him because Socrates actually, he asked them, he called their reputation into account. Like he was like, you have this reputation for being wise. You have this reputation for being pious. You have this reputation for being courageous. But I don't even know if you know what you're doing. So
Mm,
what you're really getting plaudits for, what you're really getting paid for is seeming like you're wise or courageous. And since you're not even willing to talk about it or pious, and since your ideas don't really hang together very well, what you're getting praised for is seeming to be these things. And I actually want to be these things, and you are just happy seeming to be these things. And for that, Socrates, he engendered so much resentment that they killed him. And so actually following these questions out is going to engender a quality of political resentment that in a polity that's not well ordered is going to end with some sort of sanction, either material or social death. And you just have to be prepared for that if you're going to do this work. I mean, one of the best black male scholars out there, Tommy Curry, he's in Edinburgh.
hmm.
Right?
Right.
In a well-ordered world, he should be in D.C.
Exactly.
Right? He should be, being able. He's a, chair of the Black Male Studies Department in the University of Edinburgh. But he's from Lake Charles, Louisiana. He should be Tulane. He should be
Hmm.
heading up that department. But he was, depending on who you talk to, run out because he makes people nervous about like following the question all the way through, and in a responsible way. And that is and so that's how philosophy and its commitment to getting rid of presuppositions and actually following the question all the way through was attractive. And then it turned political once you realize there's so much backlash. How many people have invested in the grift? I mean, a lot of people just get paid to lie in these United States, and especially lie to black people.
Hmm.
And that's another thing that I think black males and black women too. I think black people, we just get lied to so much. Everyone lies to us about everything all the time, and that's just no way. You can't make interesting decisions about your life. You can't determine your life if all of the information you have to quadruple check because people just lie to you. And then the only people who aren't lying to you aren't really in a position to know because they've been locked out themselves.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, did you come from an academic family?
What? No, no, not at all. I was the first to get a graduate degree in my immediate family, followed by my sister, who actually went to Berkeley.
Oh,
So she's a few years younger than me. I'm about 48, and
okay.
so I
Oh, so
didn't
she's my
come.
age.
Huh? Yeah.
I'm
I don't know
45, so she's
if you know
I'm 45.
Imani Johnson. She came out of Berkeley. She's a faculty in UC Riverside, but anyway, no, I didn't come from an academic family, and it definitely didn't have that support structure. But I was always interested in the kind of interplay between black activism, academia, so on and so forth. I kind of watched the kind of late '80s protests about South Africa, and then there was like this long pause in black political activism, at least to me. You're a little more
Uh,
politically tied in. Sounds to me like you were active more throughout the '90s and 2000s. Did you notice a pause, or what is it you saw? Because I didn't really see a lot until you had this 20, 13, 15 kind of time period, and then you see this resurgence. What did you notice politically in the black community?
I mean, Cosby taught us all that the system worked, right?
Hmm.
And it took a while for us to figure out that that was all part of the con,
Hmm.
right? So Cosby taught an entire generation, Cosby, A Different World, all that kind of taught the Fresh Prince, all that taught a whole generation that it was going to be all right as long as you just kind of worked hard and did what you were told. Not only were you personally going to be all right, but we are going to be all right. So we don't have to worry about racism. And then, that led to Obama, which kind of kept everyone quiet for a few years, so they realized black people are still poor. We got a black president, and black people are still, broke and and not buying houses and still locked out of opportunities, in kind of absurd ways. So I think the boomers, my parents, especially my mom, my dad passed, but especially my mom, she spent a lot of her life scared of the whites, and like scared on my behalf because I was a little bit mouthy. And, if that's an entire generation, you're not going to get particularly great leadership. And so people talk about the civil rights generation being like bold and all of that. Well, a lot of those guys died young and they died broke. And then the people who didn't die saw them die young and die broke and didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so I think the boomers didn't raise radicals, like not with the same kind of purpose. And that accounts for a quietness.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you're wrong. I think we were just confused.
Yeah.
I think we were confused. And so I'm from California, and we're both you're from California too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think
raised
California
in the Bay Area.
A little bit different. What's up?
I was raised in the Bay. I was from Brooklyn originally, but raised in the Bay Area since I was about 5. And I went to undergrad in LA.
Okay.
So at Cal State Dominguez, and then to Temple, and then to Claremont. So I just kind of bounced around, but most of it was Cali. So yeah.
Yeah. So California black is, I think, a little bit different. It's funny because my wife, I didn't really make sense to the first time I was in California. And she saw me in California, and then I kind of make sense in California in a way that I don't in the American South.
Right.
And what's called a free Negro. And so and we met in Chicago. So like I didn't California black is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think in a way, because there isn't like the generational degradation. Well, we haven't been in California for too many generations. Now, did your parents move to California or grandparents?
Family? My grandparents migrated out of Texas to California eventually, and then my parents were born here, and so on and so forth. So a lot of it didn't really start until my grandparents' generation.
Yeah. My mom moved from South Carolina to California. Mm-hmm. So I think there's kind of a newness and a freedom to I don't know, being black in California, because there's a way in which you're not tied down to the same kind of tradition. And honestly, and people don't understand this, my dad's from Ghana.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My dad's from Ghana. My mom's from South Carolina, and I was born in California. One of the aspects of being black that doesn't get talked about, because everyone's like kind of liberal in academia, is that you're related to other black people. So even if you're doing fine, you don't have to go too far in too many black households to find like family who's not. Right. So even if you're doing fine, even if you got a good job, even if you got a college education, it's not like all your cousins do. Right. It's not like all your nieces and nephews are going to do fine. That's not a foregone conclusion at all, or that's not even the path. Right. So insofar as black success is tied to escaping the hood, as opposed to like making the hood a good place to be, because like everyone there has a good job, a stable, $500,000 in the bank and like equity in their house and all of that stuff. Like that's what I want the hood to be. And there are white hoods where that's the truth.
Where that is the truth. But
that's simply the truth.
But to me,
so like a lot of white people, when they look at black degradation, they just think, well, those guys are just losers, because they're just thinking of their cousin who's like a meth head. who's like, I remember I was talking to one of my colleagues when I was at Brandeis, and he was, I was talking about the first time I was fired for helping out, for standing up for black people. And he was like, yeah, that was kind of like the time I was fired, except I was doing cocaine in the bathroom. And I'm like, that's nothing. I was standing up for black people, and I made my white supervisors nervous. That's why I was let go. You were doing cocaine in the bathroom. You're a degenerate. Like, so he didn't get like. So I think in the white mind, there's kind of a confusion about what Black life is if you care about Black people. And I also I tell people this, like, being Black, you take a penalty, but it's something you can deal with as long as you're willing to forsake Black people. If you're willing to treat other Black people like trash and forsake Black people, you can make it just fine in America being Black.
Okay.
What's up?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep myself together, but I'm rolling. I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on the cocaine. I had the same problem.
Yeah, we both got fired for no, you were doing cocaine in the bathroom. Like, that's nothing. You stay away from my kids. Like, you're
oh my
fool.
Goodness. Now,
and so but he thought we were the same kind of thing.
Right.
And that,
But what
so when white people look at Black people in jail, they just assume that's it.
Yeah.
Well, they're like my degenerate cousin who was doing meth in front of the elementary school.
Right. But that long pause you talked about is so important, because I didn't tie it to Cosby, but I think you're absolutely right, because we were I was especially part of a generation that only went to college because we were watching Cosby Show, Different World. I mean, I told people this a while ago. I have a son who's now 17, but about 4 years ago, I let him watch whatever he wanted to on TV for about a week. And I just asked him questions about what he thought, and everything was, pretty much as you'd expect. I had the recordings of the Cosby Show, and I let him watch about 2 episodes, and I asked him what he thought. And the first question he asked me was, can I go to college? So it still had the same impact on him that it had on me, but I didn't recognize the political silence that went along with that Cosby-esque kind of training. And I think you're absolutely right about that. And so you were pointing out that you went to Berkeley, you went to Brandeis, you went to, you're at University of Georgia. In those spaces, did you notice that silence in the same kind of way? And how did you grapple with that?
I mean, those were not Black spaces, right? So, did I notice the silence in the same kind of way? I don't know. I mean, there was a quality of indifference. You don't really know how bad Black people have it in America, like both materially and culturally, until you're in solidly Black spaces and you see just the generations. And then you contrast it to like a solidly strong white family, or recent Asian immigrant family, where there just isn't the history of degradation and trauma that they're dealing with, and not as many people lie to them about basic things, and they don't have to change their numbers when they make it, because everyone made it, so it's not that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. So black people make it, they have to hide from like their own kin, and that's not right. So so Cosby, look, A Different World almost got me going to Howard, because I wanted to meet Kim. So I we don't have legacy success. If you have legacy, this is another thing that's important. Black people don't have legacy success. And if you have legacy success, you don't have to look at Cosby, because you can ask aunts and uncles who both are not sellouts and have like our success. The only success is like, I knew what people who like lives I didn't want, because they spent a lot of their life being scared of white people or kissing that butt. And like, I wanted to be a Black success who does not kiss white butt. And Black successes who do not kiss white butt are few and far between. Yeah. And so you got to kind of make your own way, and that's not fair. And everyone lies to you about what that means. And so I just kind of kept searching and kept reading. I always read books.
No, I can't. My family, my mother, she did almost all the coursework. She wasn't able to graduate. because she had two kids, and we moved every 2 years from kindergarten through college. So we were never stable, that whole kind of thing. So I was the first to get a degree, and then my sister followed me, and we began to kind of go from there. But familially, we never had that kind of support. But I was always curious about the political dimension. My father was a Panther, so I kind of had this element that I was trying to understand that came in from that, and then I'm running into these different vestiges of nationalism. So I'm trying to relegate that, and I'm also there's all these religious elements I'm contemplating, Islam, and so on and so forth. So all these elements I'm trying to figure out, and then there's this long pause that I mentioned, and then you get to the death of Trayvon Martin. Um, where kind of where were you when when that moment kind of hit, and what politically did you see kind of come out of that?
Gosh, Trayvon, like that was a smattering, right? Because I remember there was a kid out of Cincinnati who was shot in the back by the police,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was Trayvon, and then I think Jamal Crawford over at the Walmart in Ohio. I think he was walking around with a BB gun.
Right.
Like,
Right.
he got shot, and so it's always. I mean, I've been harassed by cops, right? So that's a Negro wake up call.
Right.
As soon as I got a jaywalking ticket in Berkeley. In Berkeley, if you've ever been to Berkeley, you know how ridiculous that is, because like the crossing signs are suggestions at best. And it was 1:00 in the morning. The cop was just surprised I was sober because I don't drink, right? So the cop assumed that I was just some vagrant harassing people. But it turns out I was just walking my black butt home sober from a party to my dorm, and I got a jaywalking ticket in Berkeley at 1:00 in the morning. And interactions with cops radicalize you pretty quick. And it's funny. I always tell people when I was in college, I never trusted anyone who didn't play an instrument seriously or didn't play a sport seriously, because I just always assumed they'd sell me out in a pinch. Because if you didn't play a sport or you didn't play an instrument, I just don't know what kind of stuff you're made out of. But now, when I got older, I realized I'm a little suspicious of people who've never been arrested, never been fired, never been dumped. Because if you've never been arrested, never been fired, and never been dumped, like, how hard have you fought for Black people? Because that will jeopardize your job, jeopardize your it'll jeopardize all of those, your relationship, and jeopardize like your freedom pretty quickly if you've never been let go, or if you've never been dumped, or you've never been jailed. And so like now I just and then once you are those things, you realize that's not the worst thing in the world to be, and that kind of sets you free to ask more interesting questions.
Okay. Now, the first time I saw you, it was in conversation with Yvette Carnell. How did that start up? How did that whole process kind of begin?
With Yvette, so I think Yvette is wonderful. I think she's so bright and so quick.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned so much. Even my cadence, I picked up a little bit from dealing with Yvette. Once I realized I was going to do my PhD work at the University of Georgia, I was about the time I ran into one of her videos just when she was doing Breaking Brown. Sometimes she was on Boyce Watkins' channel. I just thought like she was just funny. She was funny and sharp. And I could just tell it was kind of a low production kind of affair. And I was like, look, I'm sharp. I can give her some like intellectual heft because I think about these things in other ways. And she's like really bright. So if I can work with her, that'd be great. So I moved to Athens, Georgia. And at the time she was also in Georgia. And so I just hit her up and say like, look, I'd like to produce a show for you. And that's when we started. I went and researched how to get all the equipment and did all like the techie stuff. And all I just needed was like her mouth and mind to do it, because I just found her like a breath of fresh air and a good sense of humor, and serious about her business too, and serious about our business. And if I could give her a little bit of stability for her then to just like, free herself, then I think she could free all of us. And I think she's been doing a pretty good job. I'm proud of the ADOS movement. Like I think she's wonderful. I there should be, by now, I wish there were like 60 or 70 of her, because like she speaks for Black people in a way that I think can and should be reproduced. I try to steer as much as I can to her, steer as much like press or contacts to her, and because I think she's like one of the best of us.
Okay. So at this time, what year period would you say you guys were doing videos together?
2015, 2016, was that
2015,
was that
okay.
about right? 2014, 2015, around there.
Okay.
That's when we started. Yeah.
In terms of, so that's around, you're looking at the rise of, say, BLM. This is
Yeah.
before the development of ADOS. This time period. What trans, if any, what political, developments, what stage are you at this time, and did it change based on what was happening, or was it more of a confirmation of what you already kind of stood for?
Well, there were some things I didn't know I was allowed to say till I saw Tommy Curry talk, right? So I didn't know you were allowed to say that, like, the problem might be white women. Until I heard Tommy Curry like lay out that, like, well, the problem might be that we think white women are something that they're not. We might, and we need to understand Black males as victims, but not just because they're Black, but because they're Black males. Because Black men and white men don't really have that much in common politically, and Tommy's got everything in his head. So like he laid out the numbers about like our diametrically opposed political views of Black males and white males. So like where's this uniform maleness? And then Black women and white women don't really have that much in common either. But white women and white men do, and Black men and Black women do. So why do we assume that gender and not race kind of organizes our political disposition and our social positioning? And it wasn't until Tommy actually kind of laid out and kind of like, I don't know, one of his videos around 2015 that I said like, oh, you can actually ask these questions. And then I read like Social Dominance by Sedanis and Pratel, and I did some, and of course Tommy's book, The Man Not, is wonderful. She just like people, I shoehorn it in every class I teach. I make sure that everyone, I try to find excerpts of The Man Not to read, because it's a more clarifying antidote to this conventional liberalism. Also, so Tommy Curry like gave me content with respect to how you need to talk about race and reproduction if we're going to talk about America how it is and not just how we idealize it. But also Richard Winfield's work on the institutions of freedom and giving content to the institutions of freedom actually gave me kind of a more concrete critique of liberalism. This idea that you can do whatever you want to, when you want to, because you want to, is kind of a disaster. And it was sold to Black people in a way that destroyed our communities. And I say this because, and now my mom admits it, that she kind of divorced my dad because it was a thing to do. And my dad, he's from Ghana. My grandfather had 4 wives at the same time in Ghana. My dad moves here and then ends up divorced in the mid 80s. And he's kind of confused about what that happens. And like, he kind of spends the rest of his life a little bit confused, alone, and then dies. And now my mom admits that a lot of that was this kind of, liberalism telling her that, 1, it wouldn't affect the kids. 2, you got to do what you want to do to be happy. And let me tell you right now, anybody who's listening, 1, it affects the kids. I could have used my dad in my life. And 2, people doing what they want when they want to because they want to doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to confusion.
Oh man.
In ways, it's the truth. It's like, right. I want to play soccer, except I want to use my hands whenever I want to. If I really want to. Well, then nobody gets to play soccer. I want to play basketball, except sometimes I just don't want to dribble. I want to run with the ball. I'm like, it doesn't really matter if you feel joy when you run with the ball. Like, for anyone to play basketball, you got to dribble the ball and pass it. Like, there are some conventions you need for any of us to be what we are. And liberals are bad at talking about that because they just say like, oh, it's just choice, do what makes you happy. Right. That's just no way to raise anything that matters, including a family. Liberals are awful parents. And I like, as I take, my job as parenting seriously, I just realize that liberals are the worst parents, and white liberals are the worst parents, but nobody tells them because they have money. Yeah. So they can pay for like the rehabs when they screw up their kids.
Wow.
Black
Wow.
like
Yeah.
black people, you need to take parenting seriously, and you can't parent like a white liberal, because like that's some nonsense. My kids do not do what they want to when they want to. They do what I ask them to do, and I tell them why they ask them to do it. And if they don't agree, they still have to do it. They'll figure out later.
Well, this leads me to a two-part question around that, because I think what you said was so profound. On a personal front, how did fatherhood change you, if at all? And on another front, a larger front in terms of the family, particularly the black family, from the time period you talked about where your father, was confused about this divorce to now, what are your thoughts on what the black family has kind of morphed into since that time? So those two questions, fatherhood and the question of the black family.
I don't know. The black family is a hard place. I mean, anyone who does a Google search is going to find out my wife is white. My wife is white. But like, it's weird because people say like, well, your wife's white, so you moved into like a white family. I'm like, no, my wife moved into a black family. and that's kind of how we raise our kids. Like, I just assume my kids are black. So, but liberalism did a job. And I think if it wasn't a plot, it worked like a plot in confusing black people about what's called for in raising a kid, and raising kids to be functional American, an America that hates them. Because like, if you're kind of raising a black family, you're raising your kids to deal with a world that is organized for their degradation, or for them to kiss white ass. And so, or butt. If you don't want them to kiss white butt, then like, you're preparing them for a struggle. So to raise a black family is to prepare your kids for a struggle. And then we're from California, so got a lot of black people get confused and think they're white when they're in junior high and high school. But then they realize when they either try to get a job or try to make moves in that job, that it turns out that they're not white. And I've seen I've seen that in LA a lot, and I see that in California. Have you seen that with black kids who are raised their white?
Oh, no, there's no question. I mean, I went to, public schools in San Jose, Santa Clara, coming up. And where I really noticed it at that time was graduating high school. Because we had college advisors that told us there was no difference between the local community college, De Anza Community College, and Harvard. There were no differences. So white kids.
De Anza's a good community college. De Anza's a good
No,
community college.
It is. But the way he framed it, for us at that time, you know what I mean? The white kids were going to 4-year universities. Many of us were going to De Anza with the mentality that it was 13th grade. So I had a lot of friends that spent 5+ years and never got an AA degree because we didn't have much structure. That's when I noticed the difference on the ground.
Right. So we didn't have guidance. Like, I'm a 45-year-old man finishing his PhD. Like, I can't help but think that maybe if I had my father for a little bit longer, I could have wrapped this up when I was 30. Right. So, there's no, it's not that there's no structure. It's just that there's no structure and everybody lies. It would be one thing if you're kind of figuring it out in a world that's indifferent. But when really, like, America has designs on you, like they need you to be a certain kind of Negro, it's a different kind of anxiety, and it's a different struggle. So they're like, everyone's lying to you, and nobody else except for black people actually care if black grandkids in 2 generations are, solvent and stable in black communities. So like, all these people in positions of power who actually lie to you don't really care if the black community is doing well in 20 or 30 years. They don't care if Jackson has water. I mean, they would like Jackson, Mississippi to have water, but like, that's not their problem. That's not them. It's other people. Other people's water is poisoned. Right. And it's not just Jackson and Flint. It's honestly anywhere there's a large congregation of black people, check the water. And that's just because of what America does to large congregations of Black people.
Yeah.
And so if you want to fight against that, like, you're not going to get a lot of good advice. And America's complicated. And that's, you know, I try to give, I speak to my kids pretty much like I speak to you. America's complicated, and, you know, you need as much good advice as you can that's honest and true before we all stroke out. Because, you know, I'm 45, you're 40. Who knows how long we have.
Right.
So I'm glad you're doing this, because, you know, when I expire for some reason or another, this video will be out there. So, you know, you're creating some sort of trove, because who knows how long we have.
Indeed.
Black men do not last very long in these United States.
And we've been seeing a lot of deaths very recently around that whole idea.
Yeah, well, the 55-year-old referee, did you see that?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
55.
Yeah, man.
It's on 55. That is not far away.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And he doesn't look like unhealthy.
Not at all. And to be a ref, you have to be, because you're moving. You're moving.
You're moving for 48 minutes.
Yeah. Talk about fatherhood.
55.
How did fatherhood affect you?
So,
especially in terms of your work.
You know, I was thinking about, well, one, it really calcified how bad liberal parents are, because I have to deal with them, and like, they can be bad, and, you know, they can raise liberal white parents can raise their daughters to be useless and dumb and like fundamentally unserious, because either they do great and it's great, or they just marry some man who's going to take care of them. So liberal white parents of daughters don't really have to take it very seriously at all, because either they raise their daughter to be studious and then she does well, or they raise her to be dumb and kind of like unable to function, and that's fine, because they'll find some man to take care of her. Wow. And make all the hard decisions on her behalf. And so you can't listen to them for parenting advice, because like they don't know anything. And, you know, and conservatives have bad content because they're just trying to reproduce an America that allows for, you know, equality of white supremacy that I want my kids to fight against. So, you know, I also homeschooled my kids like during the pandemic, and now I homeschool one of them now, and I'm going to kind of rotate which kid I homeschool, because nobody teaches them like as well as I teach them, and I want my kids to be taught well. and that's another thing I noticed about liberal, you know, just white parents in general, and parents for their kids. The institutions work for them.
Indeed.
So they can send their kids to school.
Yeah.
And the school will teach them.
Yeah.
But I can't trust the school to teach my kid a thing. Everything my kids know, they're going to learn because it came from my mouth.
Wow.
It's nice that it's reinforced in school sometimes, but I think of school as like a daycare, and like summer and vacation is when we like drill down. And my kids do very well, like academically, they can read and write all above grade level or whatever, but it's all because I taught them.
Yeah.
And we can't trust institutions. And that's one thing Black people we can't. And what does that mean to be in America, that you can't trust institutions? Whereas other people get to like allow their institutions to do work for them while they like, you know, write a dissertation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I could trust school to do the work for me without giving my kids a complex, then I would be farther along in other aspects of my life. But, you know, when they put me down, I'm going to have 3 competent young adults or adults, and that will be my legacy, even if I don't have like a zillion students.
I noticed it as early as daycare. You know, I noticed the way in which, you know, children, Black children in particular, can completely be unsupported even as early as that. And I didn't realize that until I had a child. I'm watching this, and then, you know, by the time you start talking about preschool and then kindergarten, you know, you really, you know, because we've experienced it, but it's a whole nother thing when it's your child and you're seeing the potential impact.
Like, oh, this person, it's not just they're going to be like left, they're going to fall through the cracks. I'm like, this person is slotted for a crack. Like they're like pushing them to the crack.
Yes.
And this is another thing that the Cosby Show screwed up, because the Cosby weren't great parents.
Yeah, you recently did a video on that.
Yeah, the Cosby's doing great. Like all their kids were aimless and rudderless. They didn't realize Theo had dyslexia until he was like way too old. If my kid can't I would have noticed by 6 or 7 if my kid was hardcore dyslexic. Like the Cosbys were like mediocre parents. Their kids were all rudderless. Their kids were nice white kids. And I said the same thing about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air kids. And I think this screwed up a lot of like Black culture because the Banks were not great parents if you're raising Carlton and Hillary. You don't want your son to be Carlton and you don't want your daughter to be Hillary.
Yeah.
Because Hillary thinks she's white. So
really
that's not going to end up well.
Yeah. Carlton as well.
That, well, Hillary ends up being Meghan Markle and married to a prince. Fam. There was one Meghan Markle. A lot of them are just like end up being divorced or confused about why they're broken in LA.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But your point about Theo is so important too, though, because as a young Black male, I remember the way Theo was treated throughout most of, up until that point where they recognized he had dyslexia. He was just treated as a kind of a fuck up. He just, they just looked at him like he was constantly messing up and that was it. And, by the time you add in this dyslexia moment, you realize the gravity of that is so much more serious. But I'll be honest with you, until you said it, I never really pondered the impact of that particular representation, and not just that event, but leading up to it. Because I remember how many times, they would get on him about his grades and about this and that, and it just cemented the stereotype that Black boys couldn't be taught. I mean, if we look at Richard Reeves' latest work, he's talking about boys are just developmentally behind, and you shouldn't even put them in school for a year or two before. And I'm like, what? But these are the kind of ideas around boys, especially Black boys. So that's a powerful point, and you're absolutely right. I just didn't realize how consistently that idea has been with us.
Yeah, we're not not even radicals. Like, I'm not saying, actually, go ahead and raise radicals. What's wrong with that? Raise Fred Hampton. Like we should be raising radicals, but we're not we're just clowns and punchlines and people who are not serious about threatening white power. Like that's the model of black parenting is not, we need to raise kids who are going to threaten white power and make sure the Black people get a cut of their own, of America, a fair share. Like that's just not, you're not parenting for a revolution. And anything short of a revolution is going to is consigning Black people to the degradation. People ask me, why do you care about this so much? It's like, look, I want Black grandkids, and I'd like my daughter to have a Black date to prom. And my daughter's pretty smart, which means the person she goes to prom with, I want their parents to have a good job. So reparations is good for my long-term project of having stable Black communities and a better America for Black people, the America that Black people deserve. And anything short of revolution is not going to get that. It's not going to come for that, and I think that's a problem.
Absolutely.
And we're not parenting kids for revolution. Like none of the Cosby kids. Sandra, the oldest daughter, ended up with a wilderness store and then went back to law school because she ran out of money. And it was all just the kids were rudderless. The model of rudderless parenting. There was no strong, serious Black parent depicted in the culture. There was, and even you could say well, what about the Obamas? You don't hear about it, Sasha Malia Obama. Sasha Malia and Obama are not making the world a better place for Black people. Not in any serious way.
Wow.
Where is the model? And in the absence of the model, since we don't have the cultural knowledge, because we've been under fire for a few hundred years, we grasp onto the Cosbys or we grasp onto the Obamas and then risk raising our kids like white liberals. And then we think we don't even notice that Carlton and Hillary are failures or early failures.
Yeah.
They're like that. Like Hillary does not end well in 20 years.
Yeah.
35-year-old Hillary is not someone you want to be around.
Yeah.
Either she's on therapy on a bunch of pills, or like is like terrorizing her husband, or is divorced, or like at no point in time. Yeah, like at no point in time does anyone teach us these things about how to raise strong Black kids. So you got like, and the good news is I study philosophy, so I do a lot of work without presuppositions. So coming from nothing, I can actually kind of work out content about like how to guide my three and my brood. But in terms of cultural models or cultural knowledge, like there's a lot of bad advice. And like I said, you know, a lot of liberalism might not be a psyop, but it was a pretty effective psyop to get Black people confused about, you know, what it means to raise a family. And like liberalism, this idea that you can do what you want when you want to because it makes you happy, that's not a way to like sustain any meaningful institution.
Right.
Including
Especially
the family.
Yeah, especially marriage and family. That's a recipe for disaster.
It's going to be a disaster. And like, I mean, the first time I heard someone with a straight face, an adult, say that, like, well, you know, divorce doesn't affect the kids. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, that's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Like, it's hard enough.
Yeah.
They're taking away a whole parent.
Yeah. To see Generation X as the first major generation to go through single parenthood, we were gutted. We were gutted in ways we didn't have a language for. You know, that was,
we were gutted.
Yeah.
Gutted.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, a lot of single mothers held it down, but a lot of single mothers also got taken advantage of by people like, and, you know, and the kids paid the price. Because, our communities were gutted. And that's a great word for it, of men.
Oh, absolutely.
And not just like another person who would look out for you.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, when I talk to students about this, I'm like, you know, it's like you're a blue chip athlete at the University of Georgia, and you got some hip pain, and all you know to do is to go to the team doctor. But like you're at like University of Georgia or Alabama, one of these big football schools, you go to the team doctor, the coach, and say like, well, you know, should I play with my bad hip? What are they going to say? Well, it's not going to be about you. It's going to be about what they need for their bonus.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a lot of black men end up asking people for advice or needing advice from other people who have other interests.
Yeah. I'm curious, politically, what do you think the fallout of, you know, the Obama idea, right? What do you think the fallout is going to be, especially in terms of Black politics? Do you think there will be any? Do you think, or what do you see happening in terms of that whole, you know, period, and even the rise of Kamala Harris? Do you see a fallout from this, in your opinion?
I don't know. It depends. Have people realized that Obama was as good as he was going to get being that kind of Black? And that was as good as it gets for us if you depend on that kind of Black. And we didn't get jack. And so like if people realize that, like Kamala Harris doesn't have a chance. She doesn't have Obama's charisma. She's got more of a record of doing nothing. And you know, forget the fact she's a cop. So she's not.
But we still heard that in the last election. You gotta, you know, it wasn't just about Biden. In the Black community, it was also about, we gotta get Kamala in. And I'm just kind of looking at this and wondering, like, where is this? You know, where is this going? You know.
Oh, it's people giving up. Those are people who think Black people are going to be poor, and that's just nothing. If you're not actually asking for policy, you just want representation. You just want a Black face in a high place because America is not going to give you nothing anyway. Then Kamala Harris seems like a fine representative. If you actually need something done and you need someone to make the case from a high place, then it's obvious that she's not the one. Right. And, you know, Stacey Abrams and like white liberals love Stacey Abrams, not because they think she's going to do something for Black people. And by the way, when Stacey loses next week in Georgia, Black men are going to be to blame.
Oh, man.
Blame Black men.
I was hoping you would talk about that.
What's up?
I was hoping you would talk about that. Yeah.
I mean, it's the truth because, you know, the Democrats, Black people are a third of the population in Georgia, but we don't really have any statewide power because the other 2/3, white Georgia knows its business and is pretty good about locking Black people out. And so the Democratic Party needs Black men to go Democrats like 90%. Like 87%, it's close. 85%, and Abrams loses. So what's going to happen is like 17% of Black men are going to say like, well, at least Kemp's talking about jobs and he didn't close down schools here as much as they did in California. So we'll just vote for him. And then all Black men are going to be called misogynist because like, you know, they voted for Kemp. By the way, how did the schools, because you're in California right now and you had high school age children, how did that go down for you?
In terms of what?
In terms of anything. Did it work?
I don't think it's going well at all, to be honest with you. But, you know, we're also dealing with post-pandemic, and I'm watching a young man who spent 2 years at home. And one of the things I keep hearing is that the impact of that will be incalculable. And, you know, because as Gen X, I don't understand. I'm just like, what? It's 2 years at home on a computer. You're good. These kids are not having that response. It is impact. When I talk to administrators in the school systems, they're saying it is an impact we don't understand. You know, so that's alongside a crumbling structure, you know, where, you know, it's questionable what they're doing, especially even in my son's school district. So, you know, but I'm just this lone parent trying to get him into college. So I know there's a lot I'm missing on that, but yeah, I don't think it's going well at all.
So you guys you did the online school for the 2 years?
We did it for 2 years, and then of course I kind of just, you know, supplemented as I usually do, you know, what he's doing in there, but it was a mess. Right?
You had a job. You were working the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I'm teaching from home, and so I haven't stepped foot on campus in 2.5 years. I mean, I'm still teaching from home at Fresno State, and I'll probably be home for another year, really. But yeah, I'm here. You know, he's right in the next room. You know, so I'm here. We're kind of doing that together in a certain respect. But you know, the impact of that is not something that I can calculate. They've changed so much, even in terms of college entrance process, just around the last couple of years. I'm just hoping that, you know, there's nothing glaring that I dropped the ball on, really. And that's the thing, you know, you're an individual parent against, you know, these multi-level institutions, and you're just hoping that your child is, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's one of the things I'm just hoping I didn't drop the ball on, really. But I have no idea. You know,
no idea. I feel like it was so predictable that like this online schooling was not going to work for a community.
Yeah.
That like couldn't afford private tutors.
Oh my God.
All of that stuff. And like, or people who worked. So like you were so kids were home watching their siblings, making sure their siblings ate while also doing Zoom school.
Oh yeah.
That was just not a serious solution.
And I really see it in my college students. Like one of the things I noticed is the white kids have stable computers. They're in class on Zoom. You know, my black students are on their phones and they're Zooming into class from work. You know, and and I require people to be on camera because when I didn't do that, I just have, you know, 50 icons on the screen and I would stop lecturing and they'd still be there because they're checked out. So I require them to be on screen. And my black students, you're seeing them stocking shelves at the supermarket. You know what I mean? They're doing whatever and the white kids are, you know, at their desk. Exactly. So it's you see they used to call it the digital divide in the early 90s. I think it's still prevalent, but we don't talk about it as much. But what have you noticed? Because I know you're teaching out there. What are the kind of things you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I just noticed that like black kids had 2 years off school.
Oh wow!
Like, the black kids were just, it was 2 years off school. They were working. Mm-hmm. They were like unless you had a parent who was serious and dedicated and had the extra funds.
Yes.
Zoom school was an absolute disaster.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
you're
I
right.
don't. But I've always noticed like the interesting thing about black kids. I was like black kids. I don't know if it's black kids at every school or just black kids schools I'm at. That none of them can see. Like none of them have glasses, but they all have like prescriptions that are like 5 years old. And
Oh, okay,
like
okay,
and like
okay.
I want my black kids don't have glasses like prescriptions at work. They're like, well, I can't really see very well because this prescription I got about 10 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm like, you're not in the game,
Yeah.
man. You need to be able to see
Yeah.
if you're going to take this class or anything else. And
Hmm.
like, there was
Yeah.
always
Now that's a
just like,
that's a critical example of how being, having a lack of inherited wealth, a lack of access to stable employment, that even something as subtle as glasses. You're absolutely right. I've had that scenario growing up. I came from the time period where if you broke your glasses, you had to figure out how to wear them. And and,
yeah,
and I remember turning my head too fast and the lens would pop out, and my parents you had to keep doing it just because. So even something as simple as that can have a profound impact on your capacity as a kid to even function. So you're absolutely right. I'm not going to hold you too much longer, but just really a couple more questions. The future of politics, as you see it, based on what's going on in America, most particularly in the black community, what do you see happening?
I don't know. So I think liberalism is just this idea you should be able to do what you want when you want to because you want to. And that's what freedom is. And, we don't like it's fundamentally not adequate to dealing with family issues. It's fundamentally not adequate to dealing with even border issues. Um, and it's just becoming more and more clear that that's an inadequate way to deal with some of our bigger problems. However, so black people are going to look at like conservative options. And this is what Kanye West and depending on who you talk to, Ice Cube is doing. And they're going to get tarred for all of these different reasons as misogynists. But really, they're just like anti-liberals looking for a different, like a solution that actually works for at the community level, as opposed to just pretending that communities don't matter.
Mm.
Right. So I don't, I think liberalism is going to get a worse and worse name amongst black people, and I think that's actually healthy. And
Mm.
especially now you look at the Black Lives Matter scam. Um, like I just think that there's gonna have to be a new way. There's gonna have to be a new way of thinking about our community problems around race and labor and family. And that's where black politics is going to go. Now, there's going to be some pushback, right? Because the pushback's going to call it misogynist. The pushback's going to call it conservative or hotep.
Hmm.
But what it is just the idea that we need to talk about the fact that like no fault divorce is a disaster. It's
Mm.
gutted. And no
Mm.
fault of like the idea that you can just quit your spouse like is just like turns out is bad for everyone involved.
Wow.
And so spouses have to be better with each other, but also you got to work it out. You got to figure out how to work it out for the sake of like, black kids. And there are all of these kind of casual attitudes about institutions that we can no longer afford to have, and about culture that we
Yeah.
can no longer afford to have. And I think it's gonna like the failure of Obama to materially and even psychologically lift black people out of like the degradation that is their life in America.
Hmm.
I think like kind of put the stake in the heart of that kind of hopey changey nonsense,
Ah,
right?
okay, okay, okay.
So
Kind of
it's going
affirms
to have to be
the.
more muscular, and so you're going to find black people. You're going to find black men voting for Trump, not because they hate women,
Hmm.
not because of anything that happens, but because like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden's not doing it for us.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, black men did better under Trump. They did okay. In the
Mm.
same reason that you talk to HBCU people about how black institutions did under George W. Bush. They actually did better under Bush than they did under Obama.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so like you're going to find Black people going to the GOP, not because they're under some illusion that it's not a white supremacist party, but because it's still better than the liberal alternative, which is nothing.
And that's incredible, because one of the things I've asked lately in about my shows in the last couple of months has been, how has the quality of life of black men changed dramatically under the right or the left? And how does that, does that incentivize black men to participate, or does it just really cause them to kind of check out if there's no critical change? And so one of the things that we've started to do since 2020 is I started putting together what I call a black male political agenda. And basically it was just a collection of policy ideas that people believe may change the quality of life for black boys and men. If you're asked what policy do you think would change something for the better for black boys and men, what do you think you would say? What would you offer as far as that?
Oh, the first one would be a federal job guarantee at $25 an hour. So reparations, yeah, like reparations, we can do it all, not just cash money, but also institutional and land and assets. But if you want a universal policy, you need a federal job guarantee in the United States for $25 an hour doing public works. That means whoever you are, if you're willing to show up and work, you get $25 an hour for showing up and working. And because there's this idea that you can be politically free without being economically stable, but that's like ludicrous, that you can't be politically free without being economically stable. Even some of the founding fathers, John Adams, knew this. And one of the reasons why we kind of tied suffrage to land owning white males was because a lot of the founders thought that those were the only people who were really free, because everybody else was just a tool of their boss. Right. So you need to secure everyone the conditions of that freedom. That means securing everyone a guaranteed good job at a good unionized job at $25 an hour just for showing up. And black people, before you poo-poo that, you have to understand that what there is of a black middle class is in Prince George's County, Maryland, because of all of those good government jobs. Right. So you have to understand that government jobs have been good for black people. The black millionaires that exist in the United States is like a government law enforcement officer married to a government teacher, who stayed married maybe for 2 generations, and then that's how they end up being millionaires, right? So you need a secure job for all black men and boys who graduate high school, or even don't graduate high school. As soon as they turn 18, they get a secure job, $25 an hour, and on-the-job training. We'll train you. And just the idea that you can't be politically free unless you're economically free. And the market alone, the labor market, has always degraded stigmatized communities. You can't expect a racist labor market to treat black people with the dignity and respect that they deserve or honor their work, right? So it's not just Black Lives Matter, Black work matters, and for their work to matter, they need to be paid and it needs to be secured. And so if you want one policy that's going to actually give black men and boys like standing and stability, it would be a guaranteed job, $25 an hour. And this isn't a handout, it's a job. You got to show up and do the job. But $25 an hour, guaranteed, and starting pay would go up from there. And that just like secures black men, and for them to be able to like make moves and take care of responsibilities and take chances, knowing that if their hustle doesn't work out, they can always fall back on a real job.
Excellent idea.
That would be the big thing. And then also you got to guarantee people clean drinking water and stuff like that. Like you can't. I don't know if you're in Jackson, Mississippi. I don't know how you're living your life with brown water coming out of your tap. You can tell yourself that it's not poison, although it looks like poison.
Right.
And then you're giving that to your kids. You can't feel good about yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
Consistent with calcifying slavery.
Wait, say that again?
You had an amazing opportunity to show how gender progress and gender progressivism like is completely consistent, or the kind of gender progressivism is completely consistent with calcifying slavery. Because you look at the Dahomey in history, and
Wow.
Genzo got rid of all of his opposition,
Yeah.
surrounded himself with fighting women, and like was a slaver for a while, like unrepentant.
Yeah.
And that was like, that could have been a fascinating story about how like you can be both gender progressive
Yeah.
and do so in a way that actually calcifies
Wow.
in-group out-group power. and because like that's what actually happened. Like it gave him a competitive advantage to be a better slaver.
Wow.
And I think that's feminism in the last 30 years. Like it's gender progress is completely consistent with, and a sort of pseudo gender egalitarianism is completely consistent with calcifying in-group out-group power.
Wow.
And I think that's the truth of history, and we had to massage that.
Yeah.
To get away from that. So we had to kind of go with this idea that women are sugar and spice and everything nice. And when you add more women, obviously the bad slavery is going to go away. No, that's just not what happened. He added more women in order to make the slavery a better like a system of slavery. Like a more like effective, like profitable system of slavery. Adding women did that. Did you had a much more interesting conversation about what gender progress means, but instead we changed history to fit the narrative that adding women always makes things more just.
Exactly. Did you do a formal review of the film online, or did you have?
I think I didn't put it all together. I had some of this kind of inchoate after I saw it, and I go look at my show. I think I did like a 10 or 15 minute thing about it. I just saw Woman King and I had these questions, but I think the takeaway is going to be that we had an opportunity to show that you can have gender progress and do it in a way that actually makes race and labor worse.
Yeah.
And that's what happened at the Dahomey, and that's what happened in America from like 1970 to 2020.
When I've seen fathers in particular, men, but fathers of daughters who they would normally be critical of this kind of thing, but they're seeing the impact the film had on their daughters, and so I'm noticing that they're pulling punches. They're kind of even not even talking about it. Did your daughter see it?
No, my daughter's 9.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
but you didn't let her see it, or she didn't want to?
Yeah, I didn't let her see it. We don't talk about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't. No, I don't. Yeah.
Because I mean, you're seeing these young girls who are excited, just like with the Dora Milaje from Black Panther. Like they're excited, but you understand the real history and the use of this particular representation and the problems that come with it. But you got this little girl that's excited about it. How do you balance those two? And a lot of guys just didn't even, So you're the first one I heard that just said,
say, like the next Black Panther movie is going to be all about Black women doing great things, right? Mm-hmm. So that'll be fine. Mm-hmm. As long as Black men aren't treated like trash. I think the problem with Woman King was also they were both slavers.
Yeah.
And so we're supposed to feel bad for the woman who was raped.
Yeah.
But like her job was a slave. What do we think happened? And that's another thing we don't talk about slavery. We talk about slavery in terms of the labor, which is very important. But I think maybe even a more powerful way to talk about it in America with like our kind of sex anxiety was that like we were selling people into, like we were human trafficking sex slaves. It's like slaves were raped. There was no consensual sex on the plantation. Like the master told you who to screw and when and how often.
Yeah.
And like that's what you were selling people into. Yeah. So this idea that Viola Davis's character was the good slaver because she was raped, like completely lies the fact that she was selling people into rape. Like there was not that much of a difference between her and then the dude who raped her.
Yeah.
Except the dude just did it himself.
Yeah.
And it's not like she was selling people into slaves and then the slaves were not raped.
Yeah, exactly. Well, most people missed, I think, the 2 points. So the first, that slavery was as much a sex trafficking industry as it was a labor industry, and then the second part is that men were not exempt from that sex slave industry. They treated if you stand in standard Africana studies program, when you do talk about rape and slavery, it's only about black women. And Tommy Curry was the first one I saw that actually delved into that, like, full throated. Like, I had never seen anyone do that. I asked
Does that?
questions.
Wait, tell me about the first time you heard Tommy Cock.
Oh my God. Okay. So I used to have these little debates online with Brittany Cooper, and we
Oh,
would go back
Jesus.
and forth. And of course, there would be these little digs that she would, give at this amorphous being, and I didn't know who he was. And when I finally heard his name, I looked him up, and I think I ran into his work on Twitter. On YouTube, and I was like, who the hell is this? And who told him he could do this? Like, I just had to know,
That
but
was my. I didn't know you could
I
say
didn't know you
that.
could say. But see, the thing was, I had started a blog. I started a blog called newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. I still have it. And I was trying to develop this language, this critique. I'm coming out of a certain type of black feminist training in grad school, and I'm starting to notice the impact it's having on my black male students, and I'm not liking it. So I'm starting to make this critique, and I'm putting it together. And Tommy is 10 miles ahead of me. And so when he saw the blog and we started to actually have communications, it just really just shortened my learning curve in such a short period of time, because he was so far ahead. I'm coming out of black feminism asking questions like, they're telling me that black women are going to prison at the same rate, but they've never shown me the numbers. So damn near 900,000 black men are incarcerated at this time. There are about 60,000 sisters, and they're telling me about rates in class, and nobody's talking about black men outside of that kind of thing, aside from us being patriarchs or whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I have questions. Something tells me this is wrong, but these people I trusted for years are teaching me this stuff, and I'm trying to figure it out. And then here comes Tommy. He's just kicking down the door. He's like, this is bullshit. And he nothing but empirical data. And I come out of cultural studies, which questioned empiricism, right? Conveniently. So everything empirical was always, a problem. But Tommy is just a machine gun. He's just, oh my God, he was just hitting it, and it just really opened me up, to that. And I ended up inviting him to come to Fresno State, and he actually did two events at the same time. We did a black male teleconference. So it was a whole kind of black male studies teleconference that he keynoted, and then later that night he keynoted a whole nother lecture, and I put both of them up on YouTube, and goddamn, man, just profound. And actually, I had him speak to one of my classes. I recorded this too, and I put it on YouTube as well. This was a class I was teaching at the Claremonts. It was an intro class, and the girls were trying to get me fired. The majority of the class were black girls. There's about 18 of them, and there was only about 27 people in the class. Maybe about three black males and a couple white girls. And I'm teaching this course, and everything's going fine. I do a little sampler plate on Africana studies. We're talking about psychology and history. Really, everything's fine. Then we get to gender. And the way I teach gender, I start with black feminism. I deal with womanism. They don't like womanism, but because I had a sister come give a lecture, they don't know how to critique that. If I lectured, they'd have a problem with womanism, but because she did, they just were neutral. Then I had Tommy come in and talk about black masculine, and not black masculine, sorry, that's my thing. But he came in and just talked about black male studies before he had a name for it. And you will hear him argue, like they're trying to argue with him. And it was just, it was embarrassing. What he was doing, those girls who were causing so much trouble in the class, it was just embarrassing the way he just spanked them. But their whole thing with trying to get me fired is, after I covered feminism and womanism, I didn't even have a name for it. All I did is start putting stats on the board on black men, rates of homelessness, sexual assault. I just put the stats on the board. I didn't have a framework to explain it. I was just putting the stats. They tried to get me fired because I put the stats on the board, and they said this was distracting and taking away from gender to be talking about black men. And that's when Tommy agreed to speak to my class, and they were trying to attack him, and he just made them look like the kids they were. I don't know. When did you run across Tommy?
It was around 2014. I just saw this. It was a cows video.
Yeah.
Guy Renegade. It was like one of those, and I was like, "Who
Yes.
allowed? I didn't know. Who told you could say this? You're allowed to say this. This is awesome.
Yes.
This is an entirely new form of
Yes.
inquiry you're allowed to engage in.
Yes.
And like lightning won't strike you down.
Right. Right.
And then like once I heard Tommy, I was like, all right, so you can ask anything. You're allowed to really follow the question.
Yeah.
Because everyone, like, you're a black guy, you've been silenced by a white woman, like in a position of power.
Right.
Like there are so many different weapons they could bring to bear.
Yeah.
On that, they could be insulted, they could feel threatened, they could like.
Don't let them cry.
Like,
don't let them cry.
What's up?
Do not let them cry. Once the tears flow,
it doesn't matter that they can earn like 3 times the salary you have and being like 18 like rungs of power above you. Mm-hmm. Somehow you are always the oppressor because you make them feel a certain sort of way.
Yeah.
And like nobody was ever able to give kind of clarity to that kind of power and how America needs them to have that kind of power to keep us.
Yes.
From asking questions.
Yes.
Until Tommy just kind of said, like, look at homelessness, look at wealth, look at mortality, look at like degrees. Like, in none of these institutions are black men winning over anybody, especially not white women.
Yeah.
So like, in what ways are we exercising institutional power over them? What institution
exactly
do we run relative to them?
Oh man,
and like nothing.
The only response that I hear is that usually when you hit them like that, or you see Tommy do it, they'll revert to individual anecdotal cases of abuse,
and that it must happen inside of the black family, and that everybody knows black men beat their wives.
Exactly. Then you get the man not, where he's showing you statistics on years where black women actually were abusing black men in greater numbers, and it's just like, I was like, ooh.
And then the black homicide rate, like intimate partner violence, like, people aren't ready for that. Well, he must have deserved it. He deserved to die.
Yeah, exactly.
It is
exactly.
Dead?
Oh yeah, and then you'll hear women say things like, "Well, he probably cheated on her," and it was like, okay, but even if he did, when does that mean that death is somehow suitable, right?
So, do white people have like a version of the Lionel Richie story? Because I remember hearing the first time, like, Lionel Richie's wife beat his ass. Do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have not heard the details about that. No, I've heard something happened, but I didn't know what.
She caught him with a woman, and like Lionel Richie's wife beat his ass.
Okay,
like, wow. She might have put him in the hospital.
Wow,
and that was just a punchline for forever.
Wow.
And I was like, there's no white version of that story in the same way.
No.
And then, I started telling this story, and you tell the story around enough black people, and then you'll always hear like a story kind of come up about like, yeah, my mom used to beat my dad.
Yes.
I remember.
Yes.
Like, that comes up all the time.
Yeah.
The cops called and they took my dad away.
Wow.
But I was there, and my mom like came at him with a pipe first. And so, like,
no, man.
So the first time I heard Tommy talk about bidirectional violence, and I asked for some literature on it, like, it just made sense because it actually goes along with the anecdote.
I actually had elder black men reach out to me and start telling me stories about their mothers and grandmothers pulling shotguns on their grandfathers, and it was just like, how has this not come up before now? But it actually took Tommy to kind of introduce that. But as far as your other question about the white, I think the closest you get is like the Lorena Bobbitt kind of situation. Yeah. That's as close as you get, but that's nowhere near as frequent as the kind of abuse we're talking about. You don't really hear about that kind of thing as a norm. But in the black community, when you talk about bidirectional violence,
like, she beat his ass.
Yeah.
Like, and she struck first.
You see that?
Well, he hit her harder. Yeah, and like that's like the Ray Rice video where like you see Ray Rice punch her, but you don't just go back, and then like she's like spitting on him and scratching him, and like, that's bidirectional violence with a football player.
Oh, absolutely.
That's just what that looks like.
Oh my God, man.
But there's also, one thing I didn't when I'm in a mixed classroom, I sometimes suggest there's no real white version of Call Tyrone from Erykah Badu. If we're like the patriarchs with institutional power.
Right.
And let's be honest, black men love Erykah Badu. I have zero problems with Erykah Badu. Black men love Erykah Badu. So there's not even resentment.
No, there isn't.
Like she made an entire career clowning us.
Yes.
And like, we're not even mad at her. I mean, like, I love Erykah Badu. So like, that's just how it is. And so, but like, there's no white version. Maybe there's some Carrie Underwood songs. But like about, yeah. So like, if that's what Black patriarchy looks like, Tyrone and all of his friends.
And you gotta let me put this whole segment. You gotta let me put this whole segment in the interview, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, whatever.
No, I appreciate it, man. This is fire, man. But look, like I told you, man, I'm a fan. I enjoy the show, man. I've always wanted to be able to talk with you and kind of find out just how you got to where you were and what kind of work you were doing. Because there's only like 5 of us. There's not a whole lot of brothers in Black male studies saying this stuff publicly.
And who is scared? Like, so is it the weeding out? Because like there are a lot of Black people who think like us.
Mm-hmm.
They just won't say it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't think they're allowed to say it. This is why I'm so loud, because like once I saw Tommy talk,
yeah,
like it opened up. Oh, I'm allowed to actually think these issues out loud.
Right.
I'm allowed to say it.
Right.
And so there have to be like what happens? How come? I guess Black people think if Black men think if they go along well enough,
yeah,
like it'll be all right for them.
Yeah. Even
so
in the academy, yeah, even tenured men in the academy are terrified to say something out loud. They are.
Grown men.
Oh,
grown men.
Oh yeah, I had a brother I did an interview with a couple years ago. This is the only brother I know who's doing work on Black boys and sex trafficking. Purely empirical information. Just pure fire. Did an interview with him. Fire. He reached out to me a couple weeks ago and he said, "Can you take the video down?" And I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, "Well, they're trying to fire me. They're trying to get rid of me, and they're stymieing me from getting other jobs." And I said, "Oh," he said, feminists. They're trying to get rid of me, and they're using the interview to suggest that I'm a misogynist and that I hate Black women because I'm talking about Black boys and sex trafficking." And the only compromise I could have, because, I didn't want to take it down because it's the only interview that I've heard anybody talk about it. So I said, "Look, man, can I just take your name out of the title?" And he was like, "Okay, that should work." Because at least they can't just Google it and find it. And that was the only way I could keep the interview up because I'm not, it was just groundbreaking. But he got attacked on the basis of just talking about Black boys and sex. So that's what Black male studies, cats are dealing with. And, if you don't have tenure, it's, and even then, it's still a question mark as to what may happen. They'll always
try to fire you.
Yeah.
Yeah. They'll always try to get rid of you. And so that's one thing that I'm glad that you and Tommy are doing. You're putting it clear in the title. We study Black males here.
Yeah.
We study Black males and the peculiar problems that face them. And that's enough.
Yeah.
And we will work with anybody, but make no mistake, we study Black males here.
Unapologetically. Yeah.
Unapologetically. Because this idea that you can go to a gender studies and study everything except Black men, like how does that,
no.
How do you go to a gender studies department and be able to study everything except Black males?
No, I can tell you the women's studies department at my campus used to cross list my Black male studies class until I started dealing with Tommy's work. Earlier on, I think when I first started doing it, I was using Mark Anthony Neal's kind of work, and I had some problems with it, but I didn't have anything to measure it against. So, it was fine then. But by the time I started dealing with the Man Not, and even a little bit before that, because when I first read the Man Not, he sent it to me as a Word document.
Oh,
that's how early I was dealing with it when he sent it, and he sent it to me, and he was like, "Well, is it okay? What do you think?" And I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding?" I was like, what are you talking about? Is it okay? This is brilliant. Like, it's ridiculous. So, but when I started teaching from that vantage point, they stopped cross-listing my class, and it just changed the whole dynamic, Yeah,
no, the Man Not is to Black male studies what gender trouble is to like third wave feminism. Yeah. It's that seminal of a text.
Yes.
You can build an entire and you could tell when he was writing it, it's kind of aggressively written. He was writing it like, I got to get all of this out before something happens to me. And he did. And everyone's better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do appreciate you taking this time to do this. I know you're crazy busy. So thank you for this. Tell people where they can find you and where you do the bulk of your work.
Yeah. All right. So if you like anything you've heard today, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and check out some of my other videos. Yeah, I'm also on every now and then. I'm on Breaking Points with Crystal Ball and Saga and Jetty, and I might be on Counterpoints with Ryan Grimm and Emily Shashinsky. But go to funkyacademic.com and look at my videos. I also come out with a show every Thursday on my YouTube channel. So you just put in Funky Academic or my name, Irami Osei-Frimpong, and that shows up. I will tell you one thing that you might get a kick out of. One segment I did for Crystal and Sagar that got cut when they were at their old place on online at Rising, an internet show for the Hill, was after John Lewis died. So after John Lewis died, Bill Clinton makes a comment about, well, thank goodness for John Lewis, because without John Lewis, we would have been left with Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, and John Lewis saved us from that. And then everyone said, oh, Bill Clinton misspoke. He didn't really mean that John Lewis saved the Democratic Party from Stokely Carmichael. When I actually, and then I went and did my interview saying, like, at that funeral, Bill Clinton was telling his truth. Bill Clinton did not misspeak. He was like, we needed John Lewis to sell us the civil rights movement for the low price of a few commemorative dinners and statues and an autobiography and some nice, some nice meals. And he sold us the whole civil rights movement for us to do with what we will. He sold. And you can't sell what you don't own. So John Lewis had to take ownership of the civil rights movement to sell it to the Clintons. And the Clintons at John Lewis's funeral thanked him for that.
Wow.
And that's just the truth. So I said that like 2 days after Lewis was in the ground, and so the Hill pulled that segment.
Wow.
But it was the truth. He sold the civil rights movement that he didn't know. No one person owns it, especially when you look back at Lewis's history with Julian Bond. But no one person owns the civil rights movement. But he took ownership of it and then sold it to company Democrats for pennies. In the same way that Obama sold King's Legacy and everything to company Democrats for pennies.
Wow.
And that, I feel like that's a problem. And the white Democrats and white liberals know that, and they were very grateful for John Lewis for selling him to it, selling the civil rights movement to the Democratic Party. But it hasn't done particularly that much. Okay, he was a very useful Negro, and Bill Clinton was thanking him for being a very useful Negro.
Wow. Now I gotta ask you this since you dropped that, because I had not heard that. What do you think black politics might look like now, even in terms of the Democrats, if Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture had actually been the one to step up at that point?
Step up and if he wasn't gotten managed, I don't know. The problem is there was so little money for black people outside of selling out black men. I would say selling out black people, but you could somehow the grift is pretty good for black feminists if they're willing to sell out black men, and kind of earn their shit that way. But I don't know. I don't know how you break that up. The good news is for America is that even white men in general are not doing particularly well in America. So now people are starting to actually take seriously that maybe a lot of these institutions aren't particularly that great for boys either. They're not living as long. They're not doing as well in school. They're not doing as well on the job. So now that white boys are having trouble, people will start looking at men as also victims, right? And maybe patriarchy is just a small sliver of men against everybody else. And it's not particularly that great for the bottom 20% of men in general.
Damn.
Maybe now that white boys are having problems. White boys did not do well out of this pandemic.
Right.
And guys like Richard Reeves are actually looking at this saying that white boys are not doing people are starting to see that their sons are not doing that well.
Yeah, but it's almost like the crack incident, the crack era in the 80s. It didn't become a problem until white folks had to deal with it. Then all of a sudden there was an epidemic, and we're seeing that with boys. We're really seeing now. There are some who've been doing this work on men and boys, for some decades. But those of us who are crying out loud about black men, black boys, didn't hear much. Now post pandemic, especially, I'm starting to see it. And this whole question of, when now we have an emergency, what do we do? And it's just like, this ain't new. This ain't new. None of this, but no, I really appreciate you coming through. That was profound, man. That was powerful. So you guys make sure that you check out a show. Where tell them how to find it on YouTube.
Yeah, just put in Funky Academic on YouTube, or just put in my name, Irami, Irami, and it'll pop up. It's the one that looks like me. And yeah, I come out with a show every Thursday afternoon, about 20 minutes, and I just try to like give you a nugget about how to make sense of your world in a way, and kind of like add a quality of culture that maybe you didn't get at your school, or you didn't get at home.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for joining us here at the Institute for Black Male Studies. Shout out to Professor Frimpong for coming through. We do hope that he will be able to finish his doctorate. We hope he will. Yes. But, we more than understand parenting is a job. It is a job. So it is what it is. But thank you for supporting, and check out the 15-point Black Male Political Agenda. You can just put that in Google. You can find it. Come back to the comments. Give us your thoughts on that or on anything we discussed today. And thank you for dropping by.
Thank you for having me.